diversity was created and nourished by the winds and the rains. But sometimes, this mixture can also be a recipe for disaster. The island of Kauai in Hawaii is one of the wettest places on Earth. This abundance of water, brought by the trade winds of the Pacific, has created lush tropical rainforests and magnificent waterfalls. But Kauai has also experienced what happens when the same two basic elements, wind and water, are whipped into a frenzy, a hurricane. Wind and water, a recipe for paradise and for disaster.
Major funding for nature is provided by the Park Foundation, dedicated to education and quality television. Major corporate support is made possible by Canon in our dedication to the preservation of nature and its never-ending beauty. In photographs, you can capture the wild and leave it as you found it. By Ford Motor Company. Our new vehicles are made with more than 2 million tons of recycled metals, enough to build 250 Eiffel Towers a year. Ford, dedicated to protecting the environment. And by TIAA Craft, for 80 years the thoughtful choice in financial services for people in education and research. TIAA Craft, ensuring the future for those who shape it. And by annual financial support from viewers like you.
More than 3/4 of planet Earth is covered by water. And above that lies an ocean of air. Air and water are always in motion, creating global patterns of wind and ocean currents that carry heat around the planet, evening out extreme temperatures. Wind and water make the Earth a comfortable place to live. We experience these movements as weather. But wind and water shape the nature of the whole planet. This wind and water system is powered by the sun, which burns down most fiercely at the equator. The sun's heat warms tropical seas and the air above them. Hot air rises. Tropical seabirds use these lifting air currents as they search the ocean for food. The warm ocean saturates this rising air with moisture. But as the air continues to rise, it cools down, and water vapor condenses to form clouds. Clouds are made up of tiny droplets of water, so small and light, they float in the air, like breath on a cold day. Blown by the wind, these clouds may end up over land where hills and mountains force them to rise even higher, cooling even more. The droplets of water get bigger, so big they're too heavy to float, and they fall as rain. Lots of rain. At the equator, this potent mixture of heat and rain creates tropical rainforest. Nature runs riot here, with uncountable numbers of different plants and animals. All around the equator, wherever enough rain saturates the land, there is tropical rainforest. In Southeast Asia, the rain is brought by seasonal winds, the monsoons. They come every April and stay until October, drenching the forest and everything in it. And in Australia, the tip of Queensland reaches just far enough north to be a part of this tropical rainforest belt. But the greatest rainforest of them all is in South America. The Amazon, the largest river in the world, drains a rainforest that stretches from the Andes to the Atlantic across almost the entire continent. But even the mighty Amazon can't drain away all the rain that falls in the wet season. The river spills out over the land, and as the forest meets the river, the trees are invaded by fish. But many of the trees here depend on these fish to disperse their seeds. Pacu are giant relatives of piranha, but these fish eat fruit. And as they feed, they carry the seeds away from where they fell. To the north, rainforest cloaks much of Central America. For Mayan farmers here, getting enough rain wouldn't seem to be a problem. But it isn't that simple. The right amount of rain must fall at just the right time. Rain is a powerful force of nature, a living entity, a god. The image of the Mayan rain god Chac is carved hundreds of times on this temple wall. Rain gods hold the power of life and death. Tlaloc, the rain god of the Aztecs, is still honored today. The Totonac Indians of Mexico go to great lengths to please him. In the hope that he will water their crops, they perform spectacular rituals. Four men, representing the four directions from which Tlaloc sends the weather, fly to earth like the rain itself. These clouds drop all their rain on the tropical rainforests. But the air masses that carry the rain clouds are still rising. Eventually, they bump into the upper atmosphere and flow away from the equator. 1,000 miles from the equator, they start to descend again, now completely dry and warming up. The hot, dry air sucks the moisture out of the land and creates deserts. All around the globe, on either side of the rainforest belt, lie the great deserts of the world: the Gobi, the Namib, the Mojave, the Kalahari. This is a landscape shaped by the wind. In places, the wind exposes the bare bones of the earth itself. In the American Southwest, the vivid colors of the rocks give this place its name, the Painted Desert. But the greatest desert in the world is the Sahara, stretching more than 3,000 miles across North Africa. Nothing could be more of a contrast to the rainforest, yet people have also lived here for centuries. Like the wind itself, Tuareg nomads are always on the move, traveling from oasis to oasis, relying on camels for their transport. And camels are the supreme desert creatures. Their splayed feet help them walk on the shifting sands. Life here is a constant battle against the wind. It whips up the sand into vicious sandstorms that tear across the desert. Camels can cope with the sand. They have long eyelashes to protect their eyes. People must protect themselves as best they can. Desert life seems harsh, but in most deserts of the world, there is enough precious water for life to keep a hold. It's just a matter of living with the heat and dust. But there's one desert in the American West where it seems nothing should be able to live. This is the floor of Death Valley, 250 feet below sea level. Here it reaches 125 degrees in the shade. Occasional flows of water just evaporate, leaving beds of salt. Yet there is water here. In just a few places, water wells up from underground springs. And one of the few creatures really at home here is the least expected: a fish. the Death Valley pupfish. It's found only in these isolated pools. This is the whole universe for a pupfish. For the deserts around this searing valley, spring and summer bring thunderstorms that hold the promise of rain. Sometimes the promise is fulfilled. Rain brings an explosion of life. As the water soaks in, the desert is painted with new colors. Desert annuals grow and flower in a matter of weeks. The sinking air that creates the desert hasn't yet finished its journey. It blows back along the Earth's surface toward the equator as constant steady winds. Then these winds are twisted by the rotation of the Earth, so they blow back toward the equator from the eastern side of the ocean. Blowing over warm seas once again, the winds pick up moisture. These winds are so reliable, they were exploited by the merchants and explorers on their long journeys. The crews gave them their name, the trade winds. Albatross also ride the trade winds for thousands of miles around the Pacific. The Pacific covers half the globe. Sailing across could take months, plenty of time for the trade winds to gather all the moisture they could hold. But dotted throughout the Pacific are islands, tiny specks of land in the vastness of the ocean. And where these islands lie in the path of the trade winds, once again, the air is forced upwards, cools, and the moisture is turned into rain clouds. This is Hawaii, an island chain with peaks reaching 14,000 feet out of the ocean. When the trade winds meet such huge mountains, they release their moisture. On the windward side of all the islands, the northeast side, there's so much rain, it creates rainforest. The same winds that bring the rain brought life to the islands. These fruit flies are all descended from one ancestor that arrived here on the wind. Because the islands are so isolated Evolution had a field day. The fruit flies evolved into 600 different species, all exclusive to Hawaii. Each has its own distinctive pattern and its own style of fighting. Hawaii is also a battleground between bigger forces, between wind and water, and earth and fire. The Hawaiian chain was created by volcanoes, and the big island, the island of Hawaii itself, is still very much alive. The volcano of Kilauea pours lava into the sea, creating enormous plumes of deadly hydrochloric acid as it reacts with the seawater. This is the largest single volcano on the planet. And the big island is still growing. Earth and fire overcome the forces of wind and water as the island rises out of the sea. To native Hawaiians, the lava flow from the volcano is created by a goddess, unpredictable, moody, temperamental, the fire goddess Pele. At the other end of the Hawaiian chain is Kauai, an island not of fire, but of water. This is the realm of Namaka, the goddess of the sea. The volcanoes of Pele once burned here, but Pele was driven away from Kauai by her sister goddess. Kauai is now an extinct volcano, an island that has succumbed to the power of water. The trade winds bring 40 feet of rain here each year, making Kauai one of the wettest places on Earth. Without Pele's presence, it's now being eaten away, eroded by wind and water into dramatic landscapes. These razor-edged cliffs of the Nepali coast reach up 3,000 feet from the sea. And as the island is slowly returned to Namaka, the sea goddess, it will become like the islands further along the chain. Once a huge volcanic mountain, Midway Island is a small, flat dot of land in the middle of the ocean. Now, it belongs to the albatross. In the path of the winds and eaten away by the sea, Midway Island is disappearing below the waves. Albatross come here because it is so flat. Graceful in the air, they're not so elegant when it comes to landing. They come here to nest. This is the only time that these birds of the wind will touch land. They are the spirit of wind and water, the ghosts of sailors lost at sea. As they leave Midway behind, they soar over a chain of seamounts, ancient Hawaiian islands now eroded far below the surface, completely reclaimed by Namaka. This hidden island chain stretches across half the Pacific. The winds that blow over this vast ocean push the water into huge waves. As the winds move over the sea, they do more than just produce waves. They drive the water into huge circulating currents. The most famous, and the first to be mapped, is in the Atlantic Ocean, the Gulf Stream, a current of warm water flowing northward along the east coast of America. John Cabot, the explorer, was among the first to encounter this great current. His crew kept their beer in the bottom of the hold to keep it cold. But sailing across the Atlantic, they found to their dismay their beer had turned sour. They had crossed into the warm waters of the Gulf Stream. Ships from Europe that sailed west on the trade winds could ride the Gulf Stream east to go home. Warm water that begins its journey in the Gulf of Mexico sweeps past Florida at 5 miles per hour. Hitching a ride on the Gulf Stream could save 2 weeks on the return journey from the Americas to Europe. And humans aren't alone in riding the Gulf Stream. This floating seaweed, sargassum, is the only plant that actually migrates. Rafts of this seaweed drift on the circulating currents of the Atlantic. Living within these rafts of sargassum are an assortment of bizarre creatures, disguised to look like the seaweed. Toadfish, sea slugs, crabs have all adopted the same color scheme. The toadfish uses its disguise to stalk the seaweed for smaller fish. Big ocean predators like dolphinfish, dorado, come here for the same reason. Hordes of small fish also shelter here. Sargassum rafts might be the only place to hide in the open sea, but they don't guarantee safety. The sargassum weed and its passengers just drift round and round with the circulating Atlantic currents. But as the warm Gulf Stream sweeps further north, it meets the cold Labrador current off the eastern coast of Canada, and the different waters swirl and mix together. In the shallow waters of the Grand Banks, the mixing currents churn up nutrients from the seabed. The result is fertile water that supports huge numbers of fish. Capelin thrive in these waters. In the summer, millions of them throw themselves onto the beach to spawn, to leave their eggs out of reach of ocean predators.